Hello everyone, Habiba here. Welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing a little book review. This is the first book review on my channel. So here we go. All right, so today's book is called The Dark Child by Camara Laye. So he's a Guinean writer. He's deceased now. This book was first published in 1953 in French. The French name is L'Enfant Noir. So in English, it translates to the black child, the African child, but the official English translation, here you can see it's called The Dark Child. Okay, yeah, welcome back to my channel, everyone. I know it's been a while, so I'm so happy to join you again. Remember to subscribe to this channel for really interesting content, for book reviews, for social political commentary, very good content. So remember to like this video, to subscribe, and to leave comments in the chat. All right, let's continue. So this is a classic book in African literature, particularly African post-colonial literature. It's a very well-known, it's a classic, right? And so the author, like I mentioned earlier, is Camara Laye. In the French system, they put the last name first. So in the English system, it would be Laye Camara, the first name being Laye, but the French, they do the last name first. All right, so this book, it is creative nonfiction. That's the genre. It's based on his childhood. So L'Enfant Noir, it's based on his childhood growing up in Africa, in Guinea in particular. So it's a very nice reflection on his African boyhood. Yes, so the book was published in 1953. The author was born in 1928. And now Guinea gained independence from France in 1958. A lot of years for you right there. But essentially, this author, Camara, he was born in the colonial period, verging on the post-colonial. So he was born when Guinea was still a colony of France. And now, the central theme of this story is a struggle between the old and the new world. It's a very richly told story. And when I say the old and the new world, like I said, it's set sort of in the post-colonial period. And the author, as a young man, he's born into a Mandinka village, so in Upper Guinea. So he's born into a Mandinka village in Upper Guinea called La Haute Guinée in French. And he lives in a very traditional Mandinka society where their whole world is sort of grounded in tradition, steeped in tradition, in culture. So early on in the story, we're introduced to his traditional Mandinka culture, and we learn that his father is a goldsmith, right? And so it's a society that's very, very stratified, and where people adhere to cultural norms around profession. If in your family people are blacksmiths, you're going to be a blacksmith. If people are goldsmiths, you're going to be a goldsmith. If people are griots, you're going to be a griot, right? And so, a griot is a praise singer, by the way, for those who don't know. And so, as a young boy coming up, he is at sort of the confluence, the meeting point of the old, so to speak, the old and the new world. And so the new world that is shaped by or defined by formal education, modern institutions, and so forth. And he gets this opportunity to study. He does elementary school in his city in Upper Guinea called Kouroussa. And then he gets the opportunity to go to Conakry, Guinea's capital city, for high school. And of course, his family, they're very happy for him, in particular his father, because it's an opportunity that his father never had. And they can see the benefit of it. His mother is, she's happy for him, but she's she's rather nervous, and she's very sad because she doesn't want her son to be stripped away from her, and to go to a place she knows absolutely nothing about, the capital city. So that's sort of the premise of the story, this struggle between old and new. And he, the author, when he kind of goes back to his younger self, and when he speaks when he speaks from the voice of a younger Camara, like a teenage Camara, and he describes to the readers what he was thinking at the time, we also realize that he too is torn between the old and the new. He is torn between continuing in his father's footsteps, continuing those traditions, becoming a blacksmith, a goldsmith, and learning the secrets of that, of being a goldsmith. So he's torn between that and pursuing the more modern path, or rather, pursuing formal education and becoming an engineer. He later becomes an engineer. All right, so I've told you a little bit about the story, what happens in the story. And now I want to talk about what I really liked about the story. Okay, so one thing I really liked about the story was how he describes the diversity of the culture. He describes the cultural diversity, the diversity in climate. That really stood out to me. And I thought that to be an element that really helped to enrich the story. And I think, and I'm going to get into that in just a second. All right, actually, let me get into it now. So on page 145, 145 of the story, he is discussing leaving Kurusa, his town in Upper Guinea, like I mentioned, the Manding region, of leaving there and heading to Conakry, where he'll be staying with his uncle and attending a very prestigious school in Conakry, because he's gained admission there. He got really top marks in his exam, and he gained admission to that prestigious school. So like I said, it's a huge opportunity for him. And now he takes us on the journey with him, leaving his family, and what the farewell was like. It was a very difficult farewell. Everyone was crying. He was crying, And so anyway, so here he's on the train, and page 145, he talks about reaching Dabola. Toward midday, the train reached Dabola. So that really hit home for me. I won't say why. If some of you know me, then you know why. But yeah. So Dabola is in Upper Guinea. It's on the border between the Mandinka and the Fulani region called Fouta Djallon. So here he's hearing Fulani spoken. He says he's hearing the Fulani language spoken. And so Guinea is ethnically diverse, as are all African countries. So in Guinea, you have Mandinka, you have Fulani, you have Susu, and other ethnic groups, so many others, right? And so he's from Manding, from the Mandinka area. So he says, when the train reached Dabola, he heard Fulani being spoken. Okay, and then from Dabola, the train goes towards the Fouta Djallon, so now the Fulani region. And then he talks about the train going towards Mamo, and he talks about the mountains, the beautiful mountains. And he ends up spending the night, I'm not sure if it's in Mamo, perhaps in Mamo. I'd have to go back and read, look at that. But anyway, he ends up spending the night somewhere in the Fulani region in Fouta. And he speaks about how by nightfall it got very cool, so cool that he needed a little blanket to cover him, right? Because he was feeling cool, it was chilly. And so I really like that. Because like I said, he just sort of captures the diversity of climate, the regional differences in terms of climate. And now this is very important for African literature, African studies, and just for an understanding of Africa generally. Because very often, when people think of Africa, they just think sweltering heat, they think desert, they think like just hot, scorching sun, so forth, without realizing that there's this diversity in temperature, there's this diversity in climate, and that sort of, I guess, mono narrative around the climate in Africa, it actually feeds into that sort of mono narrative, that single narrative around Africa as a whole, right? So when you read this book, you see how he describes all that nuance, and I found that to be very powerful. All right, so moving on, then he describes his arrival in Conakry, and he describes the sweltering heat. He says in the book, the heat was overpowering, right? As we approached the coast, the air was heavy, humid. And so also at another point in the book, he also comments on the heat, the sweltering heat of Conakry compared to where he's from in Upper Guinea. So I found that to be just really amazing, very interesting, right? Because this is a native of Guinea, someone who's who's from there, you know, like he's an ethnic Guinean. Yet as he traverses the country, goes and visits different parts of the country, he has a little commentary on the climate, on the language, right? So we can just really appreciate that that cultural diversity and that richness exemplified here in this book, yeah, just based on this one country, Guinea. So that's one thing I really liked about the story. I also really liked his description of his visits to his grandmother's house on page 44. So his grandmother lives in a village called Tindikan. And his grandma was very fond of him. So he got to visit her on school holidays, and they really made a big deal of his visit, right? His uncles and his aunties who lived there, and his grandmother, and they would always marvel about him. And he said his grandma would always hold a big feast for him whenever he'd visit. She would slaughter fowl, so chicken, they use fowl in the book. So she'd slaughter chicken for him, and she'd just really make much of him, you know. And in the book, he writes on page 44, one second, or rather page 43, at the beginning of chapter 3, he writes, "They pampered me, especially my grandmother, who made a festive occasion of my arrival. As for me, I loved her with all my heart." So I found that really so sweet, so poignant. As for me, I loved her with all my heart. And there are so many other poignant moments in this memoir, in this book. So I really love, you know, his stories with his grandmother. And again, he's challenging certain narratives when he tells these stories, right? And the grandma says to him, his grandma thinks he's too skinny and she wants to fatten him up properly before he returns to his parents. And she says to him, "Don't they eat in the city? You're not to go back there until you've been decently fitted out with new feathers. You know what I mean?" And then he says, "Yes, grandmother." So it's really cute. And I said he's challenging certain narratives. The purpose of this video wasn't to talk about challenging narratives through African post-colonial literature, but it stands out a bit in certain parts of the book. And what narrative there is he challenging? You know, again, very often in the global narrative of Africa, we think poverty, we think hungry people, especially in the villages, especially in the rural areas. That's how it's presented to us. In the media, that's the narrative around Africa that the media portrays. Yet very often, and those of us who know, those of us who have visited African villages, we know that you'll probably eat more there than you will in the city, right? Than you will in your own home, in the city, wherever you live. So again, he captures that in the book, that whenever he goes to the village to visit his grandma, she fattens him up. He has to eat so much, and that's one way she expresses her love for him. All right, and now my final point on something else that I really liked in the story is when he describes his departure to France on page 186, 187 of the book. He's heading to Paris, France, to pursue higher studies, his baccalaureate, so his bachelor's degree in engineering. And it's a very heartfelt departure. So he's at the airport in, he's at the airport in Conakry here, leaving. But prior to leaving, prior to being here at the Conakry airport, he was back in his hometown of Kouroussa, saying goodbye to his parents. And that was even more heartfelt. You know, his mom was actually extremely angry because she basically said, you know, "Do these people have children? Do they have heart? They're taking my son away from me again." And she just really couldn't come to terms with it. It was quite sad. I'll let you guys read that part when you read the book. Because remember, first he was away for several years to complete high school in Conakry. So he was away from her for all those years. And then he comes back after completing high school to tell his parents, "I got an opportunity, I got a scholarship to study in Paris," meaning he's going to be away from his mother again. And now this second time, she just couldn't handle it. So it's quite sad. And then now the story ends with him boarding a plane to Dakar, and then from Dakar, Senegal, he's gonna head to Paris. And he tells it in a very powerful, very poetic way. You know, he was a true creative. He says, "The earth, the land of Guinea, began to drop rapidly away. He's on the plane here with one of his classmates, Marie. And then Marie asks him, "Are you glad to be going?" And he responds, "I don't know. I don't think so." Yeah, so it's a very, very heartfelt story, very poignantly told. And just one analysis that I have after reading this is that, had they developed the colony, so in this case, the colony being Guinea, had France developed the colony, there would be no need for him to leave when he left to pursue higher education, to pursue his engineering degree, his bachelor's in engineering in Paris, in the metropole. The metropole meaning the parent state of the colony. So remember, this is during the colonial period when Guinea was still a colony of France, right? So France was the metropole, the parent state. And as we know with colonization, very often if they developed the colonies, it was to a point. Maybe they could, the citizens in the colony, they were able to pursue up to high school education. But for certain areas, certain disciplines, certain areas of expertise, they couldn't access the institutions there. So they had to go on to the parent state. So in this case, France, the metropole, and continue there. So that's just one reflection I had as reading this, when I was reading this, had the institution he needed been there, he wouldn't have had to go to France, and then he would have been able to spend more time with his mother, all that, that heartbreak, the sorrow, the chagrin or like chagrin of his mom, all of that. It would have been lessened. There wouldn't have been so much of it. So, a very interesting read. What do you guys think? Have any of you read this story? I encourage you to read it. If you haven't, it's a great introduction to African post-colonial literature. Like I said, this book is a classic. And also a nice introduction to Francophone literature. If any of you want to explore Francophone literature, perhaps you mainly read Anglophone literature. This is Francophone literature, and you can read it in English. This is the English version because it's been translated into English a long time ago. And also, it's not at all heavy. It's not a dense book. It's not at all heavy in terms of the read. It's not dense at all. Yet it's very powerful in terms of the message it conveys, a very powerful message. Okay, guys, so thanks so much for watching. Leave your thoughts, leave your comments in the chat below. Remember to like this video, to subscribe to my channel. See you soon. Bye.